Welcome back to the grand finale of our Explainer series. Over the last 3 parts, we've gone on a deeply emotional and honestly a pretty rigorous scientific journey into the human mind. We've seen exactly how the modern attention economy engineered a silent, neurological revolution right under our noses. We explored how social media platforms act literally like digital slot machines, exploiting our brain's baseline reward system, dopamine, and pushing us into a chronic state of cognitive overwhelm. If you've been sitting there feeling like studying is just so much harder than it used to be, or like reading a single chapter of a book requires this monumental, exhausting effort, or if everyday life just feels increasingly draining, you need to know that you are absolutely not alone. And more importantly, it is not a personal failure on your part. It's the direct result of billions of dollars spent specifically on attention engineering.
But today, the story completely changes. We are going to dive into the incredible science of recovery, because the big question is, if social media algorithms have so effectively altered our neural pathways, can we actually take our brains back? We all feel that subjective experience of digital brain drain, right? You know that mental fog and fragmentation you feel at the end of a long day of endless scrolling? But I really want to set a hopeful and truly awe-inspiring tone for this final explainer. Because here's the secret. The exact same biological mechanisms that allow these apps to capture your attention are the very mechanisms you can use to set yourself free. The brain is not some static, unchangeable machine. It's a highly dynamic, living ecosystem. But to fully understand how to heal it, we really have to confront exactly what we've lost.
The most shocking piece of peer-reviewed data we found is this number right here, 47 seconds. Now, there's a really popular myth out there that humans now have the attention span of an 8-second goldfish. That's entirely fabricated, so you can just ignore that. But the real peer-reviewed data, it's actually highly concerning. According to rigorous empirical tracking from researchers like Dr. Gloria Mark at UC Irvine, the average duration we can focus on a single screen before context switching has completely collapsed. Back in 2004, it was about 2.5 minutes. Today, it is a mere 47 seconds. We are actively losing the biological ability to hold a single thought. And to fix this, we have to go right back to the architect of desire itself.
Which brings us to a foundational concept called reward prediction error. We have to remember first that dopamine is not a pleasure chemical. That's a huge misconception. It is actually the chemical of salience, motivation, and anticipation. It's an absolutely essential neurotransmitter required for movement, learning, and basic human survival. It's the chemical that tells your brain, hey, pay attention, this matters. So, reward prediction error is essentially the mathematical difference between the expected value of a reward and the actual reward you receive. Digital slot machines and intermittent reinforcement exploit this biological mechanism perfectly. When you're scrolling and you unexpectedly see a highly entertaining video, your brain registers a massive positive prediction error. It dumps a huge spike of dopamine to reinforce that exact scrolling behavior. But because algorithms hit us with these massive superphysiological spikes constantly, our brains actually try to defend themselves. They lower their baseline sensitivity, throwing us into a dopamine deficit state where normal everyday life just feels incredibly dull.
Section 1. The dopamine detox myth.
So how do we actually get out of this deficit? You've probably seen this wildly popular internet trend called the dopamine detox. It sounds pretty great, right? Just lock yourself in a room, fast from all pleasure, and magically reset your brain. But as an explainer grounded purely in neuroscience, we need to clear something up right now. Almost everything pop culture tells you about the dopamine detox is completely misunderstood. Pop culture suggests you can magically flush dopamine out of your brain in a single weekend by sitting in complete isolation in a dark room. But remember what we just talked about. Dopamine is essential for basic motor function, motivation, and survival. You cannot and absolutely should not try to eliminate it. The neuroscientific reality is entirely different. A true digital reset isn't about stopping dopamine. It's about reducing excessive artificial stimulation, like that endless scrolling and those highly gamified notifications. When we practice targeted abstinence from those specific high-amplitude triggers, our striatum actually starts to heal. It undergoes a process called D2 receptor upregulation. In simple terms, your brain's natural reward system gradually becomes sensitive to normal, everyday life again. Suddenly, a walk outside or reading a good book starts to feel deeply rewarding once more.
Section 2. Neuroplasticity and brain recovery.
To actually reach this state of recovery, we first have to do something that feels incredibly uncomfortable. We have to embrace boredom. Constant scrolling trains our brain to escape boredom instantly, literally within those 47 seconds we talked about earlier. But boredom isn't this negative state that needs to be eradicated. It's a critical biological signal. Boredom is the essential precursor to neurogenesis, problem-solving, imagination, planning, and deep thinking. When you instantly anesthetize boredom with a smartphone, you completely prevent the development of patience and sustained attention. You literally have to allow yourself to feel bored so your brain can begin the work of rewiring itself. And that brings us to this famous rule of neuroscience: neurons that fire together, wire together. This is the mind-blowing power of neuroplasticity. Just as your brain literally wired itself for rapid context switching and distraction because of repeated exposure to short-form algorithms, it can absolutely wire itself for sustained focus. Through repeated healthy behaviors like reading a physical book, sitting quietly with your thoughts, or studying without a screen nearby, you begin the actual extinction of those conditioned habits. You rebuild your capacity for delayed gratification, you strengthen your executive control, and you gradually restore your attention. It is a biological guarantee that consistent practice will reshape the physical structure of your brain.
But here's the catch. Recovery is not a one-weekend project. It builds over a very specific biological timeline. It requires consistency, not just a fleeting burst of motivation. Let's map this out. After about 24 hours of reducing those intense digital triggers, you'll start to experience a noticeable reduction in cognitive fatigue. Basically, you'll feel a little less foggy. But it takes 2 to 4 solid weeks of targeted abstinence for those striatal D2 receptors to truly upregulate and restore your baseline reward sensitivity. And to see the actual structural recovery of your prefrontal cortex volume, that's the part of your brain that regulates impulses, inhibitory control, and deep focus, that takes about 1 to 2 months. Rebuilding the architecture of your brain is a gradual structural process. Small changes accumulate over time.
Section 3. The architecture of focus.
Relying purely on your own willpower is frankly a losing game when you're up against algorithms designed by supercomputers specifically to break your resolve. Instead, we must minimize interruption costs and systematically engineer our environments to protect our cognitive bandwidth. Let's look at the core principles of environment design. First up is physical device separation. There's a famous brain drain study by Ward and his colleagues that proved the mere physical presence of a smartphone on your desk, even if it's completely turned off and face down, measurably reduces your available cognitive capacity. Why? Because your brain is expending actual metabolic energy, actively trying not to check it. The incredibly simple cure? Put the phone in an entirely different room when you need to study or do deep work. Second, you have to silence non-essential notifications. Passive alerts literally destroy sustained focus. And third, enable grayscale mode in your phone's accessibility settings. This one is a game changer. It strips away all the bright casino-like candy colors, suddenly making your phone look exactly like what it actually is, a boring utilitarian tool. It basically turns it into a digital spreadsheet, completely removing the visual saliency of those digital triggers.
Now, what happens when you actually do have to switch tasks? A researcher named Dr. Sophie Leroy coined a brilliant term called attention residue. It describes the cognitive baggage your brain inadvertently drags from one task to the next, which completely destroys your efficiency. To combat this, researchers suggest what's called the 270-second residue clearing protocol. It's 5 simple steps. Step 1 is capture. Quickly write down any lingering thoughts from your last task on a piece of paper to close the mental loop. Step 2 is close. Physically shut all unrelated browser tabs, and yes, that includes the 40 tabs you swear you're going to read later. Step 3 is clear. Stand up and take 3 deep breaths to actively lower your nervous system arousal. Step 4 is queue. Open only the exact materials you need for the brand new task. And finally, step 5 is commit. Write down one single sentence stating your immediate next action. This entire simple protocol takes just a few minutes, but it allows your prefrontal cortex to fully transition, keeping your focus pristine and preventing you from dragging that mental baggage around.
Section 4. Sleep, Exercise, and Cognition.
Let's actually step away from our desk for a moment, because rebuilding your executive control is profoundly impacted by the physiological mechanisms of movement and rest. When we compare the effects of digital overuse with restorative physiology, the contrast is absolutely fascinating. On one side, we have the very real structural brain changes caused by problematic smartphone use. We're talking about things like reduced gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is essentially the brain's braking system, along with depleted dopamine transport systems. But on the other side, we have incredible healing mechanisms. Restorative physiology actively reverses that digital damage. We're talking specifically about aerobic exercise and deep sleep. These aren't just generic lifestyle tips, they are the literal biological blueprints for neuroplastic recovery.
So why does exercise work so well biologically? Well, aerobic exercise actually promotes the release of this miracle protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF for short. BDNF supports neural survival and synaptogenesis, which is the growth of brand new connections in your brain. But even more importantly for our context, physical activity directly upregulates those dopamine D2 receptors in the striatum that we've been talking about. By simply choosing to go for a run, swim, or cycle, you are literally building the biological infrastructure required for delayed gratification and sustained attention. You are quite literally healing your reward pathways from the inside out.
And then, of course, there is sleep, the ultimate cognitive restorer. Have you ever wondered why you feel that thick brain fog after a late night of doom scrolling? It all has to do with something called the glymphatic clearance loop. Digital screens emit blue light, which actively tricks your pineal gland into halting melatonin production. This significantly delays your entry into deep N3 slow-wave sleep. Why does that matter so much? Because during that specific N3 sleep phase, your brain's glymphatic system literally washes cerebrospinal fluid through your brain tissue. It's like a biological dishwasher, clearing out neurotoxic waste products, like amyloid beta, that naturally build up during the day. When you scroll late at night, you skip the wash cycle. You wake up with literal brain trash left behind, completely crippling your focus, your mood, and your memory consolidation the next day. Protect your sleep, and you protect your mind.
Section 5. Reclaiming your attention.
As we reach our conclusion, we really have to recognize the battlefield we are standing on. Attention is the ultimate human resource in an economy that is entirely engineered for cognitive capture. Algorithms are competing for your attention every single second of every single day. And if you ever doubt the severity of this, just look at the Silicon Valley paradox. Athena Chavaria, a former tech executive assistant, famously said, "I am convinced the devil lives in our phones and is wreaking havoc on our children." The very architects of the attention economy, people like Steve Jobs, who famously restricted the iPad from his own kids, and Bill Gates, who outright banned mobile phones until his children were 14, heavily guarded their own families from the exact same digital slot machines they built for the rest of us. Many top tech executives send their kids to low-tech, screen-free schools. Why? Because they intimately understand the code. They know exactly how fragile human attention is, and they choose to fiercely protect it in their own homes.
Which ultimately leaves the choice entirely up to you. The digital world isn't going anywhere, but you don't have to be its product. Every single time you choose to study instead of scroll, every time you choose to sit down and read a physical book instead of constantly refreshing a feed, every time you choose to think deeply instead of reacting impulsively to a notification, and every time you choose to create instead of consume, you are not simply changing a daily habit. Through the miraculous, scientifically proven power of neuroplasticity, you are slowly, gradually, and beautifully rebuilding the physical architecture of your own brain. Your attention is your life. What will you choose to focus on tomorrow?